I just finished recording this video for like an hour and 9 minutes, and I'm in a new place. I have a new setup. The setup is not finished being set up, and the video is very choppy. Like, the sound was fine, but it looked like a PowerPoint presentation. So we're just gonna go again. Hello, my name's Sasan. This is Proteus Debate Academy. Some of you know that, some of you don't. For those of you who don't, we are a equity project. So it's me, my buddy Paul, and we make high quality free videos for debate coaches and for debate competitors, mostly based on requests. This was a video that got requested a little while ago, and I put it off for so long that I felt guilty enough to now make it for the second time. I made a video like this last year where I went through every topic for the upcoming public forum year. After I do this, I'll make a Lincoln Douglas one also, hopefully. No, I'll just probably have to make it like this until I have my setup finished. Where go through every potential topic for the 2022-2023 season, talk a little bit about what I like about it and what I don't. This will actually go a little faster because I looked through all of them already and shared my thoughts, so I'll be a little more succinct than I normally am. There's three things that matter when we talk about evaluating a debate topic in an effective way, right? There's things that actually substantively matter. There's all sorts of ways you can analyze a debate topic, but when I'm looking at these topics and deciding which I would vote for, and I'm going to tell you which I would vote for, but really what I care about is you learning about how to analyze these topics and coming up with whatever decision you want. Here's three things to look for. The first is how novel the topic is. First is novelty. What does that mean? The more novel something is, that means the fewer times it's been debated. And that can be good or it can be bad. It can be good because novelty keeps things fresh and exciting and whatever, but more practically, it removes an advantage that a large program might have. So a large program might do every format of debate for several years and keep those files. So as a similar topic comes up, they have a living institutional memory, which might be like actual already written cases and files and stuff, ready to go for that topic, which might give them an advantage over a individual student who's competing for the first time on a topic, right? The other side of that is if you're a coach, well, having these resources for a similar topic that already existed, some of the time you can find these cases online, you can find videos of these debates happening, and that can be a tremendously helpful resource for a program where you don't really care whether somebody has an advantage winning the highest level, open level tournament. What you care about is your students getting started in a productive way. So your mileage will vary on how much you care about novelty. The other thing is the literature base. How wide is the literature base? And there's a couple things that you're looking for. You're looking for whether there's a large variety of potential affirmatives on this topic. So what that means is, does this topic lend itself to the affirmative talking about either different strategies of implementing a policy or a wide variety of potential benefits to an action? Or if it's a more value-based topic, a wider variety of ways of assessing or things to assess as being preferable. And generally speaking, having wider topics tends to be better or tends to be preferable to most people. Basically, the narrower the topic is, the stronger the inherent advantages between debaters become. What I mean by that is, if you and I are debating and I have been debating longer than you, and I've debated this topic 4 times and you've debated it once. Well, let's say you have a debate case that I've never debated against before. Maybe I have more experience than you, maybe I've argued against similar things, maybe I don't panic so easy, so I still probably have some advantages, but you probably have a fighting chance if your case is something that is viable, but also new to me, novelty again. On the other hand, if the topic really only allows for a couple topical arguments that are actually viable and the research supports it and so on, then if I've been to 4 tournaments, I've probably debated that at a tournament like 20, 25 times. And if I'm a good debater, I've gone through those rounds, looked through my opponent's cards, and reconsidered how I could have approached all of that. So regardless of how well I did at those tournaments, I have a huge advantage over somebody debating this topic for the first time. So that is an area where, more generally speaking, wider keeps things interesting. Wider gives a chance to people who aren't as experienced with the topic, but a narrow topic gets you really good at that topic really quick. The third thing that we're looking at is if it's a policy topic. And in terms of like the different kinds of resolutions, people often teach about the different kinds of resolutions: fact, value, policy, metaphor. All that really matters for your purposes is whether something is a policy resolution or not. And a policy resolution is any resolution that has an actor and an action. And what that means is that it's about someone, and it says who that is. It's about someone doing something, and it says what the action is. So the first topic on our list is the United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in high-speed rail. Someone, United States federal government, do something, increases investment in high-speed rail. Another kind of topic that's on this list would be something like, in the United States, right-to-work laws do more harm than good. The reason why that distinction matters is, one, because you will probably write your topics, or you could use advantage structure, which is something we talk about, which is really good and very useful. You should watch that video. But for the purposes of this video and the purposes of deciding which one to vote for, on a policy topic, the affirmative is changing the status quo, and the negation, generally speaking, is maintaining the status quo. There's no inherent reason why they have to do that, and there's some iffiness and there's some room to wiggle there, but generally speaking, you want a policy topic to have a defendable status quo, a defensible status quo. The reason you want that is because otherwise the affirmative has a really strong advantage, because the topic becomes do or die, which means the status quo is so bad that doing anything is better than doing nothing. And so the burden of proof you're essentially weighing the impacts of the status quo versus the impacts of the AF, rather than the negative impacts of doing the affirmative versus the positive impact. So if the status quo is really bad, it becomes a no-brainer and becomes really compelling, and the negation has to rely on a variety of existing strategies, but they shouldn't have to, ideally. You don't want to be in that position as somebody who's going to be debating these topics on the negative half the time. So let's go through these. I'll be a little bit more brief than I was before. Hopefully this video's going to shoot for 40 minutes, but I can't see how much time is passing, so hopefully it's something like that. Okay. September. Option 1 is resolved. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in high-speed rail. I think this is a decent topic. It is a pretty good balance of being novel and having existing, I probably shouldn't kick this thing so that doesn't happen, existing literature on it in the debate space. It's a topic that's been talked about in debate before, and I'm sure you can find some old files on it, but there's a lot of existing literature on it generally, right, in the literature base, in the research. The reason why is because there's high-speed rail projects, especially in California, that have been in the works for decades at this point. And there's existing high-speed rail systems in other countries. So it's very easy for us to look at what the advantages, disadvantages, barriers to success, solvency, that kind of thing has been, as opposed to something that is completely imaginary and in the future, which some of the topics kind of touch on a little bit. But anyway, it's fairly researchable, fairly good, and it leads to a pretty wide variety of strategies, because there's, when we talk about like strategy and debate, really what we're talking about is, do you get access to good impacts? And there's really only 7 or 8 good impacts in debate. You can watch our impacts video on that. What I mean by that is there's really only 7 or 8 outcomes to a policy that are significant enough that they are going to consistently win you debate rounds against an experienced debater, right? And that is how you should try to debate. You should try to learn debate in such a way that if you keep improving, you will have the skill set to compete at a high level, rather than try to only be good enough to beat novices as your like main strategy for how you improve. So with that having been said, high-speed rail kind of checks a lot of those boxes. It talks about the economy. You can relate it a lot to energy infrastructure. You can relate it to disease, all sorts of like big war, I don't know, all sorts of big stuff. So some of those will link more easily. The connection between them is very strong. Other ones, you have to work harder to show the relationship between these two things. But it's doable. There's a bunch of interesting stuff to talk about there, and there's a lot of really good literature on everycrsreport.com, the greatest website to do debate research other than Wikipedia, which you also should absolutely be using. So that having been said, the status quo on U.S. transportation is not great, but pretty decent, right? Like, it's not one of our, biggest, it's not as bad as like prison overpopulation, right? It's not a foregone conclusion that the affirmative will win this. So all in all, pretty decent topic. Second topic, the United States should substantially increase domestic extraction of production of rare earth minerals. I don't know how you produce rare earth minerals, but I don't know, maybe there's some technology. This is something that is very similar, or was a major part of an LD topic last year that had to do with the appropriation of outer space. And so a lot of videos, but some videos will surely exist on those debates, and those debates will almost certainly be talking about REMs, or rare earth minerals. And that could be a good thing for you, that could be a bad thing for you. What I will say is that the debate is very narrow here on rare earth minerals. The affirmative is going to talk about how our entire technology infrastructure is built on rare earth minerals, which are rare, as the term might suggest. And the vast majority of the mining for rare earth minerals happens in China, or it's controlled by China. And this debate is ultimately going to kind of, especially in the context that it's going to happen in, the affirmative is going to talk about why technology is really important, and this is kind of the foundation of all modern technology, and that having, such a high resource dependence on China for rare earth minerals is going to be similar to, the EU's dependence on Russian oil, and look what that did. And so that's going to be the affirmative. The negative is going to talk about how rare earth mineral mining is incredibly environmentally destructive. The other thing that the affirmative could talk about is when we talk about like non-domestic rare earth minerals, like, I don't know, like cobalt, most of it's mined by like child slaves. So in other parts of the world. And so that's definitely a great argument to mention, to like, hey, let's not rely on the labor of child slaves and maybe decrease demand for their labor so that they're no longer living in horrific conditions. But I think I can see people trying to get tricksy with this and talking about outer space and asteroid mining, and then there being some debate about whether domestic extraction and production includes extracting and producing in outer space. But then again, your argument's only going to be as strong as like the topic in LD last year, right? You're not getting a huge advantage, you're just maybe being tricksy. But anybody at a high enough level is going to be ready for that after they hear it the first time. So with that having been said, the status quo situation is similarly like, it's fine. I think it's a pressing issue, but not, a obviously foregone bad situation. The negative's also going to talk about China backlash and stuff like that. So between the environment, China backlash versus, tech, econ argument, and some sort of political, like geopolitical war scenario or whatever. I think it's a decent debate, but it's going to be the same debate over and over. I don't really see a lot of outside arguments coming in here. I prefer the first one personally. Let's go to the next month. November, December. First option is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue should establish a formal security alliance. First of all, it's not going to be much of a dialogue if you're using force. Right, so the Quadrilateral Security, Security Dialogue is an alliance between the US, Japan, Australia, and India, which when you're talking about stuff like that is really like, okay, who's it against, right? It doesn't really matter like who's in it. It's about who's explicitly not in it. So like NATO is basically countries that are against Russia. This is countries that are against China. And that is interesting to some degree if you like talking about that, but it is going to rely again heavily on a literature base that is talking about what's going on in Europe, which isn't entirely surprising for a topic area that is military strategy, but is basically going to talk a lot about the literature of like Finland and Sweden wanting to join NATO and that being provocation, and all in all fairly narrow. A lot of like, we need hegemony against China arguments versus that's not going to that is going to trigger a conflict with China, whether it's a a hot war or a cold war, whether it's economic or whether it's something more similar to what we're seeing in Europe. I'm sure a lot of people will make China war arguments, but I think most of the effective arguments are going to be like Chinese expansionism into areas that it's kind of already expanding into, but much more aggressively and much more officially. A lot like what we saw in Russia, expanding kind of into the Donbass region and then Crimea, but then now very formally and very violently trying to take over the rest, and whether that would happen to, I don't know, Nepal or something, whatever country isn't listed within this. I think that's a fine topic if you're interested in debating military strategy. The alternative is the United States strategy of great power competition produces more benefits than harms. So this is a value topic. It's assessing the status quo without proposing any particular action. Some people might try to spin it in because it's good, we should do more of it or whatever, but it clearly is calling for an assessment of the current strategy of great power competition. So part of that is, what is great power competition? Especially since great power competition is capitalized, it's clearly a term of art, which means that in the literature base, there is a specific meaning for great power competition, which I don't know off the top of my head, but whatever it is that has something to do with us competing economically with China and Russia rather than cooperating with them or something, I don't know. And benefits and harms is a very wide debate because it's going to be like most value debates. And the reason I call this a value and not like a fact is because it's mostly determined by how you as the affirmative or the negative or whatever choose to evaluate it, choose what values you are trying to appeal to, by what standards you measure it. Are we talking economically? Are we talking about educationally? Are we talking about in terms of peace? Are we talking about in terms of GDP? Are we talking about, I guess that's economically, in terms of the happiness index? Are we talking about technological advancement or whatever, right? Are we generally just talking about cooperation versus competition, or are we more specifically talking about something to do with a more militarized way of looking at it rather than a more economically focused thing? So I think there's a huge swath of different debates that can happen here, which I personally like. I like the idea that people can pick their strategy and then defend it rather than do the same thing everyone else is doing or be the person that has the totally random off the wall argument which beats inexperienced people but struggles to win tournaments. So personally, I think that is more interesting. And again, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion by any means, because like any value, it just depends on you justifying the metric you're using to measure its desirability. Okay, January. On balance, Israeli rapprochement towards Arab states produces more benefits than harms. Okay, a couple things about this topic. One, it's an on balance topic, which means nothing. I hear people talk about this is an on balance topic, and that signifies something about how the strategy should have. That means nothing. In terms of your concerns for picking a topic, for approaching it strategically, I'm sure there's some minor nuance when you're having a topicality debate, but you aren't going to be. So that part isn't very important or interesting. So then we have to look for terms of art. And here it's not capitalized, but Israeli rapprochement. What does rapprochement mean? Well, rapprochement in this context means like cooperating with or trying to build better relationships with. Now, that is not the exact term of art. I would look to see whether there is a specific definition that the literature uses, an established definition within a relevant field. So there's a couple problems with this topic. One, this month and the previous month were a value and a policy. I don't think personally that's not how I would do it, right? I wouldn't give people a choice between a value and a policy several consecutive months. The reason for that is because if that is something that is very important to people, and presumably you're doing it because you think it is important to people, that they get to choose value or policy, then in a popular vote situation, if it's the most important thing, then value is going to win all three times or policy is going to win all three times. And then whichever wins more, the other side is going to complain, which presumably that's what you're trying to avoid. Anyway, I think it'd be better to have like a month where it's two values and then just say, this is the value month. Beyond that, I don't have really high hopes for the debate community debating this in a nuanced and interesting way, rather than a bunch of kids in suits trying to come up with reasons why like apartheid is like worth it. So that's something I also don't like about the topic. But lastly, and this is more subtle, the topic says Israeli rapprochement towards Arab states produces more benefits than harms. I'm not an expert in the literature yet. I mean, I haven't read it at all. But when I Google tested this earlier, the articles that I found that were talking about rapprochement were Arab rapprochement toward Israel, which, is it different? Is it the same? I think an argument could be made that it's the same, but I certainly would not be making that argument. I would be making the argument that actually what you're talking about is Arab rapprochement towards Israel, or in other words, Arab states doing things to try to improve a relationship with Israel and just try to take out your links there. But yeah, I think like, what exactly is Israeli rapprochement towards Arab states? And produces, it's like present tense and potentially future. It's not like has produced, or we know what things we're talking about. I guess the last one's not has produced either, but this is sort of like a very, I don't know, abstract way of looking at a very tactile problem, and I don't really like that. Okay, the alternative is the United States federal government should increase its diplomatic efforts to peacefully resolve internal armed conflicts conflicts in West Asia. I don't love this topic either, for somewhat different reasons. The reason I don't like this topic is because it's a policy topic, but it's an increase topic, right? It doesn't say specifically what we're doing. It just says that whatever is happening in the status quo, the AF has to defend more than that, right? That's important for two reasons. One, we're not talking about decreasing whatever it is. So in other words, a negative that defends the status quo, like a traditional negative on this topic, would be defending whatever the current level of diplomatic efforts to peacefully resolve internal armed conflicts is, as opposed to decreasing it or removing it or whatever, right? So you're both sort of defending some level of it, presuming that we will be doing some level of it in January, which I think the Biden administration is committed to. The second problem, as you might have gleaned from what I just said, is we don't know what the current diplomatic efforts will be in January. And you don't have to vote for it now. It'll be presumably closer to January when you vote for it. But yeah, I still just don't like what happens if the amount of efforts changes during the month. I think it just creates a lot of dispute and a lot of confusion over what's AF ground, what's neg ground, and I just don't think that's great. So I mean, in January, I don't really love either topic. I think both aren't written as well as they could be, but put a gun to my head and I will watch children disagree about peaceful resolutions to internal conflicts before I willingly listen to children talk about like why like the Palestinian situation is like, well, it's more beneficial than it is harmful. Okay, February, economy. I'll have you know, I don't like economics. I think it's how do I say this? A garbage area of study. I think any field of academic study that doesn't have any level of consensus on anything is useless. But whatever, let's pretend economics is real and look at these topics. Our first option is, in the United States, right to work laws do more harm than good. Kind of hate this topic. Gonna be honest, I don't even know what a right to work law is, but it's just not that interesting, to be honest with you. I googled it, and first result is like US News says that they're bad, and the second result is Forbes says they're good. And so what are you gonna have? You're gonna have a bunch of editorials written along political lines that are like, here's why this thing is the cause of all our problems, and here's why this thing is actually the solution, even if things are bad right now. And also, none of these things are actually verifiable in any meaningful way, so we'll just kind of argue about it forever. Just not that interesting. And again, another value resolution. And like, do more harm than good. This is an area where, I don't know, I feel like it's not going to, like, you're not going to have a huge array of options for what to talk about, given that we're talking about right to work laws, right? So it's not like you're going to be able to talk about, you're probably going to be talking about like employment and the economy. And so at that point where you're not going to have a huge array of things that you're going to be able to talk about, I'd rather you at least be specific, because it seems like a topic where a debater isn't necessarily going to succeed with just picking whatever approach most interests them and then having some real clash with it. It seems like a topic where anyone who tries that has to sort of like hope the other side agrees that it's topical, or else it's going to be tough to have real clash. I don't know. Don't care for it. Like, I feel like there were better ways to have a right to work law debate if you wanted to. But I like that at least it's right to work laws do more harm than good, which, I mean, I guess it's still present. I read this as more being an evaluation of the status quo. But I suppose it's talking about right to work laws in general. It's not saying have done more harm than whatever. I just don't love it. Let's look at the other one. On balance, the United States adoption of the Ultra Millionaire Tax Act of 2021 would produce more benefits than harms. This topic, what's not working well for it is that it's conjecture, right? There's very, a term that we use is that the links have been tested, which essentially means that when I say A causes B, I have another scenario to point to where A causes B. We've tested whether there is the link between these two things, and there is, or we've tested it and there isn't a connection. I don't know how well the links have been tested on Elizabeth Warren's Ultra Millionaire Tax Act of 2021, but given these two options, I don't know. I feel like pick or poison. One's policy, one value. I would basically just pick whichever one you haven't debated or the one that you like more. I'm not thrilled about either of these. The problem is, conjecture about what would happen economically in the future. Like if there was reliable evidence for that, then we wouldn't have an economic system entirely founded on speculation. Okay, 2023, March, South and Southeast Asia. Okay. Option 1 is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations should formally recognize the National Unity Government as the legitimate government of the Union of Myanmar. Yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know what the political situation in Myanmar is right now, or what the policy positions of the Myanmar National Unity Government is. So I guess if I knew a little bit more, I would have some more nuanced answer. But practically speaking, most of the arguments aren't going to relate to the specific policies of what's going on, because that's just not how debate works. So the affirmative is going to argue that the status quo is bad there, right? So given that it's a national government, you are going to be arguing that there is some sort of political group that is facing some sort of strife or human rights situation that is currently bad, and this other government is going to better represent that group or avoid that condition of strife through not being corrupt or not being, whatever, right? It was the same for Scotland independence arguments, the same for the, what's that area of Spain? How am I forgetting? Barcelona, isn't it? Catalonia, of course. How could I forget as an Orwell fan? So that's the first argument. And the second argument is going to be some sort of hegemony argument, right? Like, I don't know, again, like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, like, I don't know who they are, but I know who they're not, and they're not China, right? That's like why these organizations exist. So what's the neg going to talk about? Well, this organization is actually really bad for this reason, because they have this political whatever, or they have an inability to solve this strife situation, and you're getting China backlash, and that this is going to blah, 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 blah. Same debate that we talked about earlier on the other Asia topic. If you didn't have that topic that month and you want to have that debate, go ahead. Pick this topic. The alternative is the Republic of India should ratify the Artemis Accords. Okay, so I looked into the Artemis Accords a little bit. The Artemis Accords have, at first glance, and I emphasize glance as being how far I looked into it, as being a space exploration treaty. And what I will say about space exploration as a big Carl Sagan fan and enthusiast of astronomy is that it doesn't matter in debate. It just doesn't, right? The affirmative is going to try to talk about all of these amazing space technologies and how investment in space has paid dividends. And the thing is that, one, there's no indication that that advancement isn't going to happen regardless of whether India does or does not ratify the Artemis Accords. Like, you're going to have a very hard time finding a unique link between that literature and the Artemis Accords. And secondly, a lot of the technology and the advancements that gets talked about in space topics are based on very kind of like fluffy science, or like the threats that they talk about are like, they're asteroids are going to hit the Earth, and if we do this, we'll stop it, but if we don't do this, we won't. Like, it's just, the uniqueness debate is very weak on space topics. Things are either gonna happen or they're not gonna happen, and any one specific action is very unlikely to be the make or break factor in that. The final problem with space topics is, no, I mean, I think that I combined that. It's basically, yes. Basically, it's not really gonna, oh, no, I remember what I was going to say. The final problem is that the best way to explore space is with a telescope. There's very, very little that we need human exploration for. And there's the whole idea of like, I don't know. I don't understand like the argument that like, well, if an asteroid hits the Earth, humans will be extinct. And so we need to have humans on Mars. Like, why? Who cares? Like, humans are going to go extinct anyway. Like, I'm sorry. That's just what happens to species. I'm not saying it'll happen soon, but yeah, every species goes extinct. That first. But secondly, like, let's say there's 10 billion people on Earth when that happens. There also being 1,000 people on Mars doesn't make 10 billion. Like, what do I care if there's 8 people on Mars when me and everyone I know dies? Like, what does that do for me? Oh, like, oh, good for humanity. No, I don't get it. Anyway, the space debate is not a debate I enjoy very much. As somebody that cares a lot about that area of study. So between these, yeah, I mean, I would probably go for the first one, especially in a scenario where the quadrilateral security dialogue topic wasn't what was picked. And yeah, yes. Otherwise, it's going to be basically that same debate, but not even, yeah, it's going to be the same debate because it's the same region. So, okay. Technology. April. The United States federal government should ban the collection of personal data through biometric recognition technology. Pass. Bad topic. Yeah, I don't know. Like, anytime you talk about like a ban topic, especially something like this, right? In theory, the harms should already be happening, or you're imagining that some new version of biometric technology will emerge or something like that. So you're kind of, a lot of it's speculation or should have already happened, and neither is terribly interesting. The other thing is that it's completely unenforceable. I don't know how the United States federal government bans the collection of personal data through biometric recognition technology when we can't ban the collection of personal data through any other technology. And also, the United States doing it doesn't prevent other nations like China through TikTok or whatever doing these things, or places just doing it illegally and getting away with it, which they have and do. I think all the negative needs to read is a million no solvency arguments and then one argument that says there's some medical whatever that biometric something does something with, and that it being banned doesn't stop bad actors from using the technology, but it stops legitimate research from getting funding because it's banned, and so blah 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 blah, we may as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just how the debate's gonna go. I also don't know why biometric technology is like significant, right? Like, I understand that it violates your privacy, but the resolution doesn't resolve for you not having your personal data collected through other ways, right? The affirmative doesn't get to defend a scenario in which you don't have your personal data collected. And so the only thing they can defend is the personal data that's unique to your biometrics, but I don't really, is the literature base there for anything particularly interesting about like people knowing the distance between your eyes and nose? Or it is talking about like biometric recognition technology. Like, that's, I don't even know if that includes things like your like genome or whatever, but yeah, just doesn't seem like it has a lot of unique, I don't mean unique like novel, I mean unique like specific to biometrics. Like, you get to resolve for a significant impact specifically because you banned biometrics and not other things. I just don't see that being a great topic. The alternative is the United States federal government should establish global standards for artificial intelligence. The issue here is that I don't know what the term of art global standards means exactly, and I'm sure that most of the people who debate this topic won't know what global standards will be. I looked it up and there's some stuff about the EU establishing global standards. So what is this debate about? Like the US doing it as opposed to another country doing it? Or are we talking about like the US doing it as opposed to global standards not existing? The other problem with the AI debate is that it's pretty much all conjecture. Like, there's no existing AI that does anything that is particularly interesting in a widespread enough way, right? I mean, I think there's a couple applications that exist right now that are emerging and are concerning, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of it's about like the good things that AI could one day do and the bad things that AI could one day do. And the problem is because these things don't necessarily exist right now, we don't know how they work, so we don't know the efficacy of a specific method of regulating it or banning it. It's based on a lot of conjecture, so I don't know how useful the literature base is going to be. So I don't love the first one, but at least the first one's talking about the existing status quo and a policy that would mean something today. I don't know. It's kind of your pick here. I don't love either of these topics. Nationals topic. Topic area civics. Option 1. The United States should adopt ranked choice voting for its federal elections. No, bad topic. Yeah, so in formats of debate where you have different topics every round, in limited prep formats of debate, like parliamentary debate, this is like baby's first debate topic, is getting rid of the Electoral College. And yeah, it's hugely in favor of the affirmative. I think public forum especially is structurally set up so that the negative doesn't have a lot of outs in scenarios like this. And if you do, right, like if you do win this debate, it's because you were just way better at debate than your opponent. And then you would win that debate anyway, right? Like those two teams against each other, if the better team wins 10 out of 10 times, then the topic isn't playing any sort of role. I think where the topic is most interesting is where you look at whether it unfairly shifts the dynamics when the two teams are very close to each other. And I think this does that, right? I think if two debate teams are very close in skill, this significantly skews the debate in favor of the affirmative. Why? Because the status quo is inarguably awful, right? Like the current federal election system is inarguably awful. Like, forget the many years of highly detailed, highly substantiated evidence speaking against the Electoral College. Forget the mountains of research indicating that ranked choice voting is the best alternative, not even giving the negative a lot of interesting, because usually what happens in parliamentary debate is like at least the affirmative, the topic is like go to a popular vote, so then the affirmative's like we should switch to a popular vote, and the negative's like actually ranked choice voting is better, so let's do that. And then the actual will be like, well, that is a form of the popular vote, or whatever, right? Like here you're picking the most well-substantiated alternative, so the negative doesn't really even have any great alternatives to go for. Regardless of all of those things, at the time of making this video, we are several weeks into and potentially still months away from the conclusion of a set of congressional investigations into our election system being tampered with. Like, it's what could you possibly say to defend the status quo? The only negative argument available for this strategy is the Electoral College is a unfair system that is rigged, and we can rig it to help the good guys win against the bad guys. That's the only, and who the good guys are and who the bad guys are will depend on your political affiliations, I guess. But the only point you can make for it is that it's a necessary evil. But I don't see how you could possibly argue that it is the most effective, like, election mechanism available to us. And so, yeah, no, it's not a good topic, in my opinion. It's a great thing for more people to be aware of, but I think whoever wrote this topic and the discussions around it were probably like, we should have this topic. And then somebody was like, I mean, wouldn't that debate be unfair because everyone will agree? And then somebody was like, well, if everyone agrees, then it would have already happened. So let's let them have that debate. I don't know. If you were in that room, let me know how close that was to being the exact conversation. Finally, We have the United States should end lifetime appointments for Article 3 judges, which after doing a Google test seems to just be any sort of federal judge. It's an interesting topic, but I mean, yeah, so the problems with it are that there's logistical problems with it, right? So the negative would try to talk about those, right? How would it work? How would you implement it in a way that avoids X, Y, and Z problem? So, for example, if term limits get imposed at the same time, then everybody that is currently on the court would presumably hit the end of their term limit at the same time. So then you're just having an entire Supreme Court change, and you're not changing the appointment system by which the president appoints Supreme Court justices. So now you're just getting like one president picking every Supreme Court justice. Like, that seems worse. But then again, because they all got appointed at the same time, they would all also get replaced at the same time. It would only start to stagger once people start dying within their terms. Also, how long is the term? How do we know? The public forum doesn't have plans. So we're talking about like links to just the concept of a term limit rather than specific benefits to a specific approach or specific problems with a specific approach. So that's not great about it. And the other thing is that the negatives impacts would have much better time frame, because say backlash arguments or whatever, those would happen pretty much right away. But the term limits being met, like the only unique impacts that the affirmative can get, other than like people believe in the system or whatever, right? The only actual differences would come when the first set of term limits have been reached, which would, or not term limits, I guess, because that would, I don't know, appointment limit, I don't know what you would call it. But yeah, the only unique impacts to that aren't some sort of like, we now feel different, would happen once the first end to a term has come. And so your impacts are locked behind this sort of time frame, whereas the negative can start talking about impacts right away. Your impacts don't happen for another, I don't know, 8 years, or we don't even know what number of years, because maybe there's a specific proposal. I think actually the Democrats introduced this or something recently. So maybe the community can agree that that is the way we're interpreting the topic, and we're talking about this proposal. But just going by like, I don't know, debate law, there's very little for the affirmative to go on. But so yeah, a very an incredibly skewed topic to a, I mean, I think there's problems on both sides. I think there's a huge argument to be made that the status quo is not good. And so that helps the affirmative at least as much as the vagueness and the time frame hurts them. So I'd say it's fairly even. It's not the best topic, but yeah. I mean, I would probably pick that over the ranked choice voting one for those reasons. Anyway, if this video didn't record, or there is some sort of problem with it, I will be just giving up and never coming back. So